Welcome to Access Zen with Gregory Foster. Our program will help you set a more perfect balance between your inner world and the outside world. And now, here's your host, Gregory Foster.
And hello, everyone. I'm Gregory Foster, your host, and you're listening to a brand new episode of Access Zen Radio. Thanks so much for tuning in. Last week, we had Siobhan Moran and Betsy Thompson on, really talking about manage your energy and master your life. And this week, we have a very special theme on creativity. Say hello to Freeman Michaels. Freeman, how you doing this morning?
Good, Greg. Thanks for having me.
How's life treating you these days?
Oh, well, it's better now that I'm talking to you.
Well, that's great. So we want to talk about the theme of our show is the value and benefit of expanding our creative consciousness, compassion, and goodwill. And kind of the concept is, how is creativity linked to being spiritual? How are those two kind of combined together, and how does that keep us in balance in our life and flowing, right?
Beautiful.
How about that?
I love it.
So Freeman, please give us a good introduction on who you are and where you've come from.
Who is this guy? All right, so, wow, how do I start? It's funny about this because there's so many different ways to describe who I am, and none of them are sufficient because I'm a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I'm a dad and a husband. I think that's sort of primary in my life. But I have found my way to being a life coach. I have found my way to being a radio show host, similar to you. We share time on KKZZ. You're on Thursdays, I'm on Friday mornings. And several other things have expanded in my life that now feel like expressions of me. I'm going to call them constructive expressions of me. And that really is the segue into what you're talking about, Greg, is that what the premise of my work is, and frankly it's the premise of my personal process, is that everything that's going on in my life is some either expression or reflection of some part of my experience. And I know that's a bit heady, and I want to make that incredibly simple for folks. Basically, there's a very simple quote. I didn't make it up. I'm not sure who did. But we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. In other words, there is a... Go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Now, I'm really just clearing my throat, but now that you've given me a chance.
Now that I shut up for a second?
I think you're being way too modest.
Oh, bless you.
This man, folks, has written this incredible book called Weight Release, A Liberating Journey, a powerful new way to release weight forever. And he has two incredible radio shows, the Freeman Michaels shows, which airs on Fridays, and the one he did that you do with Barnett Baines, which is a video show called Cutting Edge Consciousness. And If you don't know Barnett Baines, then you need to go out and get some movies, because he's done some incredible stuff with Robin Williams called What Dreams May Come and Celestine Prophecy. So you've got some creative stuff going on, am I right?
Yeah, no, and I also do a show with Dr. Michael Lennox called Perchance to Dream. Actually, that's taken the place of the Freeman Michaels show. So Cutting Edge Consciousness airs on KKZZ on Fridays. Perchance to Dream is on hiatus, but and I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but it looks like we're going to be coming back on a network. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm going to just leave that out there. Yeah. And it looks like actually Cutting Edge Consciousness will also be moving, not off of KKZZ, but also to a network. A little early to tell that one too, but there's some good stuff, coming down the pike, and it is a result of how I'm expressing myself. So it goes back to this idea that I want to give you a concrete example, and I'm going to have to kind of,
thank you,
in my head, give you an example of this. Well, we talk a little bit about victim consciousness. People really, the hair goes back up on their heads when I say this, and people don't like it, and I don't have another way of saying it, because it's really what it is. So if I come from an experience, let's be really aggressive and say it's even a cultural experience. So my wife, for example, is Mexican American, and within her cultural experience, there's a whole story about being underclass and being, brown and being sort of second-class citizens, which is a reality. And I'm not going to diminish that reality. I understand that it exists in our collective. We've created this environment where there are people that play the role of second-class citizens. And it's a bad bargain for everybody. But in the dynamic, I will participate. She just doesn't buy into that. Subsequently, people don't treat her that way. Very rarely. Every once in a while, she'll get some feedback from her universe that there's a thread of that still exists. But by and large, she doesn't buy into it. So what happens, but she's still very connected to her culture, family, and so forth. What will happen is they will report certain experiences where they are being discriminated against. And in fact, they are. And the question becomes, so she has a cousin who's very similar in age. They basically grew up together, and her cousin went a certain route. She's very clearly identified with being a Latina. She's got some, tattoos. She dresses in a particular way, and so forth and so on. And this cousin reports constantly how the world is treating her. My wife, who went a different way, and it's funny, within her culture they call her a coconut, which means white on the outside. We watch these experiences reflect our beliefs. We watch something, and this is a stupid example, but let me give it to you. Let's take the word bananas. I say bananas. First thing that comes to your mind.
Apples.
Great, interesting. So you associate with it as a fruit. So let's just say I say bananas to someone who's in that defensive state of mind. And they say, did you call me nuts? Did you call me nuts?
Pecans.
Another person might say, bananas, slipped on a peel, that's funny. What creates the interpretation of a word that technically means fruit? And you could go with that, but clearly there are other connotations, and there's myriads of ways and layers of interpreting things. So we all do this. We all have these experiences. Another simple example is if you're frustrated and you go out in the world, say you get in the car, you will experience traffic, you'll experience people cutting you off, you'll experience, and I even hear sometimes people say, what are the odds? Well, that's a very interesting statement, because the odds are that all of these occurrences aren't going to line up so perfectly if you just play the odds. But from our perspective, and I'm going to include you in this because I know, Greg, you share this with me, it's more than synchronistic. Yes, it's synchronistic, but it's just energy. It's just a lining up with what we believe is going to happen. The old line, you get what you expect to get. In other words, you get exactly what you think you deserve.
Let's take it back to you.
Go.
Because, I've known you since we started doing USM second year, which is going on, a few years now. Yeah. And working with you and the radio shows and all that, I've really gotten a chance to see where you are today and where you're going. But I also know that you had an acting career. You want to share with us where that was? And then also I want to talk about your real estate boom and bust, because you're talking about what I hear you saying is outer reality reflection or experience, and that's kind of our link between creativity and spirituality.
Well, and it's fast part of my acting career. So acting for me.
Who were you, by the way? Tell us about that real quickly.
Who you mean? Oh, but
yeah, the listeners would love to know that about you.
Well, a lot of people knew me as Drake Belson on The Young and the Restless.
Drake Belson.
In the middle 90s, I played that role. But I played other roles as well. I came on the final season of 90210 and played Matt's brother Patrick. And there's a myriad of little moments where I played a role, and people were then responding to me on the street, going, "Hey, you're, this alter ego kind of thing."
So let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
Some people would say that when you reach that is a pretty high level of success. You're on a major soap opera. You're on 90210 when it's at the peak of its popularity. Some people would say, wow, he's really manifested here, right?
Sure. I hear you. I think that at the time it was a reflection of something that I had bought into. I don't want to pretend that I was able to embrace it at the time. I was very conflicted. I got really depressed in the middle of Young and the Restless. Let me track back a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Here's what acting was for me. I grew up being told I was too sensitive. And I experienced the world that I was too sensitive. And what happened for me is I first went the route of sports, but I had some acting experience. As a little kid, I was on a show called Get Box Tickle, which was just it was a locally produced San Francisco Bay Area show on a public television station, and it was a family show. And I was a little kid. I was like 5 or 6, doing these little skits kind of thing about science or nature or whatever. And I shined. I really shined. And then later on in life, I did a play, like when I was 12 or something. I played a role in a play and shined. And then I got in high school and I started playing football. And because that's what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to be an athlete. That was what my kind of programming told me was to be successful. And I had some friends doing plays, and I would go to their plays, and I was really like sitting in my seat dying to get up there because that's what I really wanted to do. Ultimately, I quit football, which didn't go over big with the football players, and decided to do theater. And what happened for me is I felt more alive playing a character than I did in the roles I played in my actual life. I had more permission to feel my feelings. So all this sensitivity that was bottled up in me got to get expressed in a very constructive way through art, through creativity,
Beautiful.
through acting. So that's actually ties back to the notion that we need to have constructive expressions, even of the disowned aspects. We want to actually own them, integrate them, disintegrated aspects, and then find a constructive expression for them. It's a big part of what I teach right now in my coaching is I help people to own the whole self.
So let me slow you down right there.
Sure, of course.
That's some pretty deep stuff. So what do you mean by constructed realities of ourselves? What does that mean?
Well, constructive expressions. So if we're not aware, let's go back to the self that we, for example, don't like. For me, it was the idea that
It's too sensitive?
Yeah. So, and I even have.
I hear you.
I really believe there's something wrong with me. I wet my bed till I was 12, and I had a real heavy duty sense of shame about that, and that was my deep dark secret. I didn't want anyone to know that. If they knew that, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me.
The judgments people would have, kids.
Yeah, and I was running it. I was running the story. There was something wrong with me, and I had these moments where I kind of came out of my shell, as it were, and I got some affirmation in the world, and it wasn't where I lived. It was just these little glimpses of what was possible. And on stage, this other idea that, a big part of my acting was for approval. I mean, it was something I was good at. It was something I could get approval for. And as I got older and better, and I finally found my looks, I was a little bit of the ugly duckling. I was a chubby kid, and I kind of had this emergence where I thinned out, and I started getting all this feedback, especially from girls, that there was something. This was a good thing. It was huge for me because I didn't feel very good about myself. So the part of me, this disintegrated part of me, this disowned part of me, I found expression through acting. I found ways to be okay with it. And I found expression through personal growth work, that I found a way to be okay with these parts of me. And so what's happened is I had a split in my life where there was the right-hand side was the acceptable me. Left-hand side was the part I didn't want anyone to know about. And my idea was I would push down the left-hand side and I would, identify with this right-hand side. That's a recipe for disaster. And I'm afraid right now that a lot of folks who have tapped into the law of attraction are misled. And they believe that they have to repress the side they don't like and perpetuate these little stories, this magical thinking about the positive side. And the problem with that is it works to a degree, and then it comes apart because the disowned part, it's like we call it feeding the beast. They're actually, by pushing it down, they're actually energizing it. And it will get expressed in their experience, expressed or reflected. We say often that it leaks out. In other words, they're pretending to be this persona, this spiritual persona, and what's leaking out is this disowned aspect. So my coaching work is a lot about helping people sort of own those pieces, integrate them, and then find expression for the parts of us. And this is usually stuff like fear, sadness, anger, these feelings that are just so pushed down. We want to find constructive ways out. So art is a brilliant one. Painting, for example, poetry, acting's fantastic. Dancing, dance the problem, that you have another way of tapping into a part of yourself and getting it out so it's constructive. And when we do that, then it doesn't leak out anymore. We're in relationship with the part of us that can, if we don't pay attention to, can wreak havoc in our lives.
Well, let me share with you, and let's stay with that theme because I know that that's something that all of our listeners can relate to. So for me, I had a very similar experience when I was in high school, especially the first couple of years. I was very tall, very thin. I hadn't caught up with myself athletically yet, and I was very shy around girls, and even if a girl liked me, I just had absolutely no idea how to talk to her. And then an interesting thing happened as your career went into acting and creativity. I had a foray into that, but I actually went into sales. I got a sales job my sophomore year.
In other words, you got an acting job.
I got an acting job, exactly. Another form of it.
Of course.
And I could go out there, and I would be with that crew of people who didn't go to high school with me, and I could go knock on doors. It was a sales job, knocking on doors, and I could be the coolest, funnest, greatest person in the world. And then I'd go back to high school, and I wasn't able to integrate the two together, so I literally developed two personas.
Yes.
And that followed me through my life all the way until I got to USM, University of Santa Monica.
Yeah, we call that a split. So it's like split personality. You have a self that you project out in the world, and that is, another language for this is adaptive personality. It's a personality we develop as a way of coping, of getting by. So yeah, that's very typical, and I've had several of those. The beauty of calling them out as characters is that then there's no guilt or shame. It doesn't feel like we're betraying us, being these different characters, if you will, and playing these various roles.
So we all do that in our lives, don't we?
Of course. And the idea is to realize what's being expressed in the persona. And look, a large part of our persona, for most of us, a large part of our adaptive personality is built out of defense. And so, breaking that down and having a sense of compassion, because you brought that up earlier it's actually in the title of the show. How do we have compassion for ourselves? How do we allow for these parts of us that we have judged as negative? Be it our sensitivity or our height, I mean, you said I was tall and thin, and the world was saying it's not okay to be tall and thin, or any other variation on this theme of what's acceptable and unacceptable. And it's interesting too, because you have people who have broken out of that paradigm. I mean, you think of someone like Oprah. Oprah's not supposed to be, the most famous woman in the world today. Bette Midler isn't your classic beauty songstress. Barbara Streisand has a heck of a hook on her nose, and she's considered beautiful, and it's considered a sort of a wonderful. There's nothing ugly about it. You see it in terms of being, this credible diva kind of thing. So there's all these ways in which we've bought into something collectively, but the minute someone as an individual doesn't buy in, I brought this up with my wife, to the degree that she doesn't buy into it, it's no longer true. People can try like mad to project that onto her, but if she doesn't take it, then what happens to it,
Right, so let me take you back. So you have this successful acting career, kind of an extension, you call it an extension of your personality. You're able to really express yourself. You're successful on The Young and the Restless. You're doing some great shows, but you're feeling depressed. So you get out of acting. Is that right?
Well, no. There's a little.
No?
Yes, I did. I quit at some point. I quit acting. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of layers to this. So I don't want to interrupt you, but we're going to take a break in about 3 minutes. So okay. So I can give you my 3-minute answer.
Yeah, thank you.
So again, there's a big part of me that doesn't feel okay in the world, and I have this fantasy that I would be saved if I was famous. And everybody liked me, I'd be saved. If I found the right woman, and I went through a marriage and a divorce during my acting career, I met another actress who also did some soap work. She was on The Bold and the Beautiful, and whatever. We got married, and we were supposed to live happily ever after. And then I was out of work, and she was out of work, and the bills started mounting, and all of these parts of me, these disintegrated parts, didn't just come up; they got amplified. I had an expression of, I call this crashing the bus. And that's where this sort of disintegrated aspect of me unconsciously jumps into the front seat and starts driving the bus. And it will crash it. And so that can look like a lot of things. For me in the past, there's been issues with food. I could really go down any addiction route if I really wanted to. I mean, there's a part of me that can just, lose myself in distraction, and it becomes an expression of the part of me I don't like.
So the part of you that crashed the bus was a part of you hadn't made peace with yet.
Oh, you bet. More than I hadn't made peace with. I wanted desperately for it to go away. I had no sense of its value. I do today. I mean, my sensitivity and even the part of me that gets anxious and overwhelmed, I have just tremendous compassion for that part of me. And I don't know. That's the work, is to really own our experience. And then it's interesting because then when we see it reflected back to us in the world, we can offer compassion to it. And when I say reflected back, I mean in other people. So when we react to someone, our judgments are always about us. So when someone comes in and we say that person's an idiot, the little tagline I offer is, in your mind, always say, and so am I. So if you feel yourself wanting to say, that person's an idiot, and so am I. Oh my gosh, it's me. It's a reflection of me. And so as I start to own that and see it as an opportunity to pick up these fragments of me that are scattered around and all the people and experiences that are coming up, I begin to have compassion for them. And they change. They go from being sort of nuisances and bothers and things I want to go away to things I really need to pay attention to and incorporate. And life takes on a very different quality from that perspective.
So we're going to go on a break. When we come back, I want to talk about how you evolved from your acting career into a real estate mogul. How about that? And then your journey to University of Santa Monica, where I met you, and where you're going today. I'm Gregory Foster. You're listening to Access Zen.
And now, let's return to Access Zen.
And we're back. We're back with Freeman Michaels. I'm Gregory Foster, your host. You're listening to Access Zen Radio. How's it going, Freeman? You're
Good,
telling
buddy.
us some really interesting stuff, some really compelling things that I know all of us can relate to. So the theme of the show is the value and the benefit of expanding our creative consciousness, compassion, and goodwill. So we're going to talk compassion and goodwill, and you're kind of interlacing that in. But it's really a journey to get there, right? Because none of us are perfect. We all have these parts of ourselves, as you say, that we feel disowned with, that we don't accept a part of ourselves. So it's like, do we have compassion for who we are? You said, I heard you say before the break, I grew up feeling like I was too sensitive. And I'm sure people who are listening could fill in their own word, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, no, this is the sort of, the nature of the spiritual, that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, but the human experience is really critical, is that the opportunity to see the dimensionality in our own experience and the experience of others is a journey, and we come from a certain lineage. 7 generations back, we bring with us certain DNA, which we know now from epigenetics that DNA is not a hard, fast prescription for an outcome. It's possibility. It's a possibility that's coming through our genetics, but in fact is malleable. It changes. It changes with our own personal changes, because now I'm going to science, but it's kind of interesting. The DNA comes in the nucleus of the cell. 50% of the nucleus of the cell, of any cell, is protein, and 50% is this DNA, this sort of blueprint for possibilities that could play out. The membrane of the cell is like the brain of the cell. It's what actually receives the input and then generates reaction. The point being this, that the messages that are sent, if the messages are sent aren't consistent with the DNA, it won't activate. And eventually it sloughs off. And so we actually can change our DNA vis-a-vis our consciousness.
That's fascinating. That's fantastic.
Bruce Lipton is the sort of genius behind all of that. He's the founder of epigenetics. Fascinating guy, interesting stuff. Wrote The Biology of Belief. Brilliant book.
So you are one of the creative people that I've ever met in terms of your ability to express ideas, both from an acting perspective, and then you went into business, right? You went into real estate. Tell us about that.
So that was a sidelight. I was an actor, and actors always need something in the in-between time. And when you're an actor, most of your time is in-between time. And my father had owned a couple of buildings, he and my grandma, who was a realtor in San Francisco. And so when I got to LA, we started looking at some property, and I bought some apartment buildings. And this is back in the middle 90s. So I rode the ride up, and I at some point had quite a bit of property. I think I had something like 10 buildings. I had some land that I was developing. I quit acting at some point, and I, with a partner, started a development firm called Developers Investment Group. And we brought in equity players, other people to put in equity, and debt. We took on debt to develop housing tracts, housing and commercial, but mainly housing. And we had hundreds of lots that we were developing in various places. And so I rode the thing up. At one point I was very what's the word for it? I mean, I had a big net worth. It's all an illusion. It's imaginary money. But, from a certain perspective,
you reached a level of success. You reached a very high level of success again in your life.
Yeah, here's what it was. It was an expression of something, Greg. Again, if I was famous, then I'd be lovable. If I got the girl, I'd be lovable. Those fell apart. Well, if I was rich, then I'd be okay. I wouldn't feel anxiety. True. I felt more anxiety, rat race, hamster wheel, if you will, experience. I was managing, between my partner and I, we were managing $500 million in development. We had tons of housing tracts going in, and we had a lot of other people's money, and I got
Wait. So I just got to wrap this up. So you were successful in acting, good looking, got the girl, rich, and you're telling me you weren't happy?
Miserable. It was, I was waiting for the shoe to drop. I was so anxious. I didn't sleep at night. I gained, I have over 100 pounds swing in my adult life from my low weight to my high weight, which is why I wrote Weight Release, is that I had to release the weight. And it wasn't just the physical weight. It was the burden of belief structures that had me caught in these behavior patterns, these habits, habitualized patterns of behavior that weren't serving me. And then, so, as you and I know, often a breakthrough is preceded by a breakdown. Something in I often say there has to be a wall, a crack in the wall of composure for the light to get in. And for me, this self that I had constructed, this self, this person I projected out in the world and said, this is who I am, was flawed, and it had to kind of come apart so I could begin to really own what I'm calling the left-hand side of the page. This is the disintegrated parts of me, and heal those aspects of myself so I could be more in integrity, which means integrated. Because I wasn't in integrity. There were these parts of me that would leak out, these parts of me that were manipulative, and there's a lot of shadow expression when there's a disintegrated aspect. That wreaks havoc. It causes all manner of behavior that ultimately this bus crashing experience will, anything good in the world gets undermined and diminished by the disowned aspects, the shadow pieces that come out.
Did that impact your creativity? Did you hit a wall?
And it's not, so my creativity got expressed in other ways. It was no longer about expressing creativity. And ultimately, going back to school, we were classmates at University of Santa Monica, the spiritual psychology program, which was a huge piece of my recovering, regaining parts of myself and integrating parts of myself.
What was it about that experience that enabled you to start reconnecting with those parts that you felt were disintegrated, that were crashing your bus? What was it?
I had done a lot of personal growth work, but it was all sort of these little pieces, and I never put them all together. Frankly, I didn't put them all together even at USM. I put them together afterwards. But USM was a major part of putting many of the pieces together. It's interesting because here's the challenge with this kind of work, is that, you can have the greatest teachers in the world, but the process is so personal, it's so individual. You can be told something that is everything that you need to hear, but if you're not in a place where you can hear it, it doesn't make any difference. So it's something that one has to come to in their own way. USM was a huge piece of my personal puzzle, but there were other really critical ways that I had to discover myself.
So what I hear you saying then is, for those of us out there, no matter what job we're doing, whether we're in sales, whether we're an engineer, whether we're a lawyer, we all have the opportunity to access our creative capacity and apply it to our life in a way where we feel very full and integrated. Is that correct?
That is beautifully said. That's right. And we all have disintegrated aspects, parts that we need to pick up and own and recognize, and find constructive expression for, so that we get to be all of who we are. And as opposed to just trying to be these are the parts of me I like, and I'm going to push those out in the world, and these other parts, we'll just pretend like they don't exist. It doesn't work. That falls apart.
So if I'm someone out there, how would you recommend, I know you're in life coaching, this is something that you do, right? You work with people who say, I've hit a wall, I've crashed my own bus, I need to get these parts that keep leaking out that are affecting my ability to be effective in my life. And I can relate to that very much.
Yeah.
That's what you do, right?
Yeah, so basically we do a bit of inventory. So we find the areas in their lives where this stuff is showing up. Most times people feel like it's happening outside of them, and I teach them to pull it in and own what parts of them are coming out and or being reflected. And then what we want to do is find constructive expressions, but it's not enough just to find a constructive expression. You actually have to create a practice. So these are ways that we honor ourselves, self-honoring practices, and we begin to care for the parts of us, self-care practices. So we create these practices which are conscious expressions of parts of ourselves on both sides of the page, left hand and right hand. Right hand being the identified self, left hand being the disidentified or disowned self. And we want to have both. And when we begin to integrate them, here's a fascinating piece. A lot of the stuff on the left-hand side, it starts as we view it as a liability. That's the problems we have. What is interesting is when we begin to own them, they often flip and become our assets. So my sensitivity is my asset. I just didn't know that. There's lots of things that I was like, oh, that's a bad thing. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, the way that my system operates is so perfect when I'm aware of it and I'm working with it versus judging it and denying it. So that's a big piece. And once people begin to own these various aspects and find creative expression and self-honoring ways of putting themselves out in the world, their whole world changes. The whole thing. It's like it's a little like the lights go on and the trees get a little, greener and the sky's a little bluer and the flowers are a little brighter because there's more room for them in the world. We're expanding their container. Their sense of the self is expanding. And there's a layer after that, which is where we actually work on expanding various capacities that take us from, first story to second story to third story. That's going to take a minute to explain. But there's another piece beyond just becoming more effective at who we are. It's growing ourselves to a place which we don't yet know. Basically, there's the known self, and there's a part of us that is yet to be discovered. And that's where the most exciting work is. For me, and it's where I'm at in my life, is what's my edge? What's my edge? What's the place at which I'm not willing to go beyond or haven't in the past in terms of certain capacities? So I'll give you one. Connection, for example. Our friendship, for example. You and I can be in a great conversation. We went to dinner the other night, and we're sitting there hanging out. And there's a point where I feel myself pull back. We're really connected and it's almost like, oh, that's too much. That's too much connection. That's too much intimacy. I can't handle that. Well, there's my edge. I hit my upper limit. I hit the point where that's as much capacity as I have for intimacy in a relationship with a friend, for example. So when I become aware of that, then I want to dwell on the edge. I want to go, okay, breathe. I'm okay. And I'm consciously expanding my capacity for more intimacy, more connection. And what happens is this kind of lid comes off my life and this richness starts to occur. And so that's my favorite part of the work, is to getting to where we're actually expanding capacity and we're discovering this self that is yet undiscovered.
So let me take you back. What I hear you saying is you reflect back on it later and go, what was it that stretched me? And what I hear you really saying is outer reality reflects inner experience. So what's going on in the outside isn't the problem or wasn't the root cause. It's what it triggered on the inside. Is that accurate?
Well, and you can flip that. And so hanging out with you is going to be very different than me going to the corner bar and having a beer and trying to connect with someone. There's a more environment that can be filled by both of us. And so that's a beautiful thing. There are certain activities. This is why creative expression is so important, is that there are certain ways that lend themselves to expansion. There's certain ways of expressing oneself in the world that lend themselves to expanding one's sense of oneself. And that's important. So that's the flip of it, is I'm creating outer experiences that can expand or broaden my inner life. And we set ourselves up. Strategies, used to be strategies for success, but it's more strategies for expansion.
So when we talk about compassion, what does compassion mean for you, and how do you use it with yourself first? Because then I'm going to go to Goodwill. So let's talk compassion. How do you find compassion for yourself, and how would you define compassion?
My breath expands my ability to be present to whatever's going on. And so I can breathe into something and begin to allow for more and more and more, and just allow for more and more and more. And what I'm allowing for is greater dimension. the language is dynamic complexity. So the ability to view things from lots of different angles is very expansive. When we're in a defensive state of mind, we constrict and we become very myopic. We see things in a very narrow perspective. That's what judgment is. Good, bad, right, wrong. Bang. That's it. Either or. What the awareness is that you and I are talking about, this consciousness, this expanding of our perception, is multidimensional. We can see the layers of things. We move from either or to both and. I can be sad and mad at the same time. Part of me's mad, part of me's sad. Wow, okay, that's going on. And I can begin to see all of this and peel away these layers. And compassion has a quality of sort of benevolence, where we don't just allow for it, we hold it with a sense of its own sacredness. Like, wow, this is so profound, this humanity. And the world opens up, and we begin to see things more accurately. So I'll say this in very simple terms. Compassion, this expanded awareness, opens up our experience. The judgment narrows it. Shame, blame, and guilt are misinterpretations of reality. They're ways that we lock in very quickly. So that's the upside of compassion, to work.
So self-acceptance, right? You're just accepting yourself.
Total acceptance. Yeah. And the desire is to see and accept more, to see more of what's going on, to see deeper into things.
And that allows us to get into the flow in our life.
You got it. When we're seeing the currents that run below the waterline is the way in which we see things. Above the waterline, we see it. So if the Titanic, if they were more perceptive, they would have actually seen below the waterline. It's an interesting analogy, because you say, well, wait a minute, they can't see below the waterline. Well, they can't see with their eyes. But there you have other capacities that might be diminished in our culture, such as intuition. So when we tap into these other ways of perceiving the world, we become more, we have a deeper sense of what's going on. We can actually tap into what's going on below the waterline.
So by having compassion for ourselves allows us to access that sense of knowing and intuition on the inside and outside. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, you bet. The whole world begins to open up when we can see the.
So we don't have to stay in judgment of these parts of ourselves that are disowned, that we're afraid might crash the bus, that might leak out and cause havoc in our lives. We can learn to integrate those into our lives and make those a positive, and then feel compassion for ourselves. Is that right?
Bingo. That's the work, man. I mean, and it's not something you do one day. It's not a magic pill. There's no real arrival, like, enlightenment, I'm there now.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like that. It's a process. And don't get me wrong, there are destinations. There are moments. We have these points of reference, is what I call them, where we have these ahas, these clicks, these perfect moments where we see everything clearly. And that's great. But then there's a real tendency, and it's very normal, then to have some other part come up again, and we're constantly being called to go deeper. And in our greatest capacity, Greg, I don't know anyone who's reached their greatest capacity. I don't even know what that looks like. Can you really walk on water? What can we do? Well, the truth is we don't know. We use such a small fraction of our brain that the possibilities are really endless.
That's beautiful. It is so true, too. So when we feel this level of compassion within, then what happens as we look outward? We feel the same compassion towards everyone else, because why? What you just said, we're all having a similar type of experience, maybe at a different level or at a different point. But once you start to realize the other person has a similar stuff going on, doesn't that free us up to be compassionate for that guy that just cut us off in traffic, or a boss that yelled at us, or whatever happens, right?
Yeah, that's one layer. And the next layer is we go from trying to know things to stepping into the unknown. We call it stepping into the mystery. And that's a pretty exciting place. So yes, the first thing is a level of maintenance. So let me run through the stories real quick. First story is our first story, the first story we tell in the world, the first story that we're indoctrinated into is our basic programming. That's our race, our religion, our tribe, where we come from. It's what happened to us in our lives. And then the second story is how we overcome that, how we begin to individuate, separate, and succeed and move through whatever trials we bring with us. That's what we call second story. But the third story is where the creativity really gets juiced up. The third story is the becoming. Barnett, my partner, and I on Cutting Edge Consciousness have referred to this as leaving the reservation. This is where we go out beyond the known, and we start to operate and explore the unknown. the sacred unknown. The truth is, right now, I believe collectively, we have a collective shared experience, which is a reflection of each of our individual experiences. But the collective shared experience is saying to us, you must go beyond the known. Because, all these problems that we've created, these crises in our culture, aren't going to be solved at the level of consciousness from which they've been created. That's a quote from Einstein. And it's a true statement, is that we have to begin to think beyond the constrictive thinking of the status quo. We have to move beyond that. We have to develop capacities beyond logic and reason. Our culture is so tied to logic and reason, but logic and reason only gets us so far. I'm not diminishing it, but I'm just saying that it's only one way of viewing things. There are, like we said, intuitive capacities. There's imaginative capacities. I mean, our imagination is so structured. People say, oh, I'm creative, and what they're really doing is regurgitating other people's movies, other people's songs, other people's whatever. It's just, that's not real creativity. It's a kind of creativity, but then there's an unstructured creativity, which is where, genius occurs. That's where Edison comes up with a light bulb. That's where Einstein comes up with E equals MC squared. That happened for him in like a dream state. He woke up from a dream, and then he kept fantasizing and thinking about it, and eventually he's like, I got it! And it was so outside of cultural perspective. He broke all the rules. So of course, he met originally with a lot of pushback, but he had a sense of knowing. He stepped into it. It's an idea that's time had come. So it was a moment in time where he was able to leave the reservation, and it changed all of us.
So staying with this theme, and I appreciate that, stepping out into the unknown and all of us having the opportunity to access our Einstein within. So from, finding that compassion within and feeling the compassion outside. So I'm kind of staying on the path of how does freeing ourselves up, integration, feeling compassion for myself, for you, how does that lead to goodwill and an expansion of my ability to express really positive creativity?
Okay, so let's go with goodwill. The goodwill is the new bottom line. That we're talking about permission, we're talking about freedom to create and be creative and to collaborate and to join with other people in a vision that's beyond just ourselves. So we're moving into a consciousness, sometimes referred to as the gift economy. So instead of looking at what we can get in the world, we're looking to what we can give, what we can offer. It's a very generous mindset, and it's the way out of what we've gotten into. Like a lot of the crises in our culture are about what we can get. It's a scarce situation.
Transactional, being very transactional.
Yeah, and it's out of whack. When we reframe and begin to look at, wow, what do I have to give in the world? What do I have to offer? What do I have to contribute? How can I collaborate? How can I be a better team member, a better partner, a better friend? And where are my edges personally so that I can begin to expand beyond them? I hold them all as truths. As little bits of truth that are in those particular ways of viewing and framing and perceiving my world. But I'm very careful not to buy in too heavily to any single path, any single thread. So then I hold them all. And what happens is, again, it's an expansive thing. It's like this whole new way of relating to the world. It's a big offer for folks, so I'm going to leave it there because I can go very far with explaining, with exploring this, and it can get a little esoteric. But it really is just about us dwelling on our personal edge, about extending our own boundaries of what's possible in every area of our lives.
I so hear you. And also, one could ask, where's the goodwill at? How can I translate this into my life and express it in a positive way? That's really what goodwill is, right? It's not expecting to get something back. It's giving back to the world.
It's the gift, right? Yeah, it's saying, what do I have to give deeply and profoundly to myself and in the world? How do I allow for and express these aspects of me? The aspects of me that got triggered, that felt like I wasn't good enough. The aspect of me that felt expansive, like, wow, I could create anything. The part of me that wants to prove and impress. And how do I want to be with those parts of me so that I begin to allow for the entirety of my experience and find really wonderful, clear expressions in the world? Look, we're doing it right now. I mean, just in relaying to an audience our experience, and our own ponderings and wonderings and musings and discoveries. Yeah. It expands the conversation. My hope is that the conversation you and I have becomes a conversation that other people have around the water cooler or over the dinner table. That's the greater opportunity.
It's not about, because this happens with people every day, right? Whether it's at work, it's their buddies they play hoops with, going to concerts with, a couple friends. There's dynamic. You mentioned dynamic complexity. There's dynamics that happen inside and outside of ourselves, right? That are going on all the time. It's what level of awareness do we have?
That's right.
And how quickly can we integrate that and go to a place of peace and compassion so that it doesn't trigger us, so that the next time we're even more expansive in that conversation or that presentation or that meeting with the boss, whatever it might be, right?
And that is going to, forgive the drama in this phrase, that's what's going to save our world. Look, the word crisis, in Chinese there's two characters to represent the word crisis. And the first character by itself means danger. The second character means opportunity. So, yes, there's danger. I mean, our financial system is precarious right now. And the, ecology is all out of whack. And there's so many ways that the schools are in crisis and this is in crisis and that. And again, we keep trying to push harder at the way we've done it in the past versus really being innovative. And so the cooperative and the idea of contributing, that I'm contributing something and that I'm not trying to get anything. I don't need to win. I don't need to dominate or control other people. That I have something to offer in the world and so does everybody else. That's a very expansive mindset. And that is the future. If we can't adopt that, and if we stay with the sort of myopic thinking of trying to get and what's mine and all of this way of scarcity and this over-identification with producing. We're producing like mad, but we don't know why we're producing it. We've lost touch with the why behind what we're doing. There's factories in China producing endless amounts of crap that no one needs, and no one's ever thought for a second to say, wait, do we really need that? Is that really improving the quality of our lives? That's a collective issue, but it's a personal issue. Like, I have to look around me at all the stuff I've collected and go, what is this about? What is this about? What of this is serving me, and what do I need to release? Physically, I needed to release weight. I needed to look at my eating patterns and reorient myself and begin to practice mindful eating and begin to choose consciously what I wanted to put in my body, what I wanted to fuel my body with. Because what I was feeding myself was a lot of negativity. And so what's really feeding me? What am I ingesting versus what do I want to be ingesting? And when we begin to personalize this, then we see the collective change. It's automatic. So we can see it both ways. We can see it reflected in our outer world as an expression of our inner world. We can see it in our inner world and how it gets expressed in our outer world. See it both ways. It's a way of viewing our experience.
That's fantastic stuff, Freeman. On last week's show, Siobhan talked about that when you get into a place of compression or judgment about some aspect of yourself or something we perceive someone else did, rather than lashing back out or paying it forward in a negative way, to go do something positive, whether it's help someone out that you get no credit for, you're completely behind the scenes, just from a place of compassion and love, I'm going to help this person out. Or maybe it's giving a donation, or maybe it's helping a homeless person, or maybe it's going and volunteering at a shelter. But that's what we mean by goodwill. And what happens when we do that is it frees up our capacity to love and grow and not be transactional and start to save the world, as you say.
Well, and in doing that, we have to work through our resistance, And at first it may feel like, I'm giving this, but I don't really feel like I can. And then, what's that about? And then we keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and expanding into more of a sense of self. What we want to get to is where it's a natural thing, where the giving isn't so much a reaction to the part of us we don't like that's getting expressed, but it actually is integrated enough where it's very natural for us to give. It's not an issue anymore. The dollars in America are called Federal Reserve notes. I like to think of them as thank you notes. And it's just a little exercise folks can do. Is take these dollars, these Federal Reserve notes, and consider them as thank you notes. And the next time you buy a coffee or anything, I want you to energetically exchange gratitude. So not just pay for it, but literally, energetically offer it as gratitude, as a thank you note for the cup of coffee. This whole way of viewing our experience changes the game. It's not the way most of us are oriented. It's not the way much of the world works, but we can cut right through that by being intentional. It cleans up a lot once we get clear. But the work is for us as individuals. Again, I go back to the idea that don't worry about the collective so much, worry about yourself, and it'll affect the collective.
So thank you so much for the show. Really appreciate you coming on and really kind of, linking the value of being creative is really linked to how we're compassionate with ourselves and how we express it from a sense of giving back in the world. Is that accurate?
We are creators. That's what we're doing. We're creating our experience every moment of every day, whether we know it or not. The beliefs, the thoughts, the ideas, whatever's running in our experience is actually what's coming out and being reflected back. So the idea right now is, as we become more conscious, more compassionate, more understanding, more aware, what we're doing then, and we respond from a place of intention, where we choose what we want to put out in the world, where we expand our capacities, what happens is the world around us moves with that. It's a natural law. It's a spiritual law. It's a spiritual principle. And that's my work. It's my personal work. It's what I need to do for myself. It's my imperative personally. But it's also what I offer to folks when I coach them, is the opportunity for them to expand into a sense of self that much as they could imagine. And then my goal is to take them beyond that.
That's beautiful. So how do folks reach you and hire you as a life coach? And I'll give you a plug for the radio show. Go ahead.
All right. So Service to Self is my website. So www.service2, spelled T-O, self, service2self.com. And then the show's cuttingedgeconsciousness.com. Cuttingedgeconsciousness.com is the show I do with Barnett Bain.
And they are wonderful.
Bless
Beautiful shows.
Thank
But
you.
please hire Freeman. He's got some really great stuff. He'll help you. And you can see he's been through a lot in his life. All right, Freeman, have yourself a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, my friend.
Take care.
All right.
And thanks again for listening to the show today. I'm Gregory Foster, your host. You've been listening to Access N Radio. Remember, you can find this show as well as other episodes by visiting us on our website at accessnradio.com. And on next week's show, Doctors Donna Uhrman and Vicky Vaudin will follow up this show titled How to Achieve Happiness, Health, and Optimal Performance. Make it a wonderful week.
Thank you again for being a part of Access N. Please join your host, Gregory Foster, again next Thursday. We'll reconnect next week.